Royal Guard's last day. What happened when a Texas girl said just 5 words? Welcome to our channel. We're so excited to have you here with us today. Before we dive into today's story, we'd love to hear from you. Let us know where you're tuning in from in the comments below. Whether you're from a small town or a big city, we want to know what part of the world you're joining us from. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss our special stories. We've got some incredible tales lined up for you, and you won't want to miss the next one coming tomorrow. Stay tuned and enjoy the journey. James Carter, a 30-year-old British Royal Guard, stood perfectly still on the steps of Buckingham Palace, his gaze fixed straight ahead. Today was no ordinary day. It was his final shift before leaving the life he had known for the past 8 years. With dual British-American nationality, James had always felt a unique sense of duty, one that stretched across 2 nations. His father, a former U.S. Marine, had instilled in him a strong sense of discipline, while his British mother had taught him the values of loyalty and tradition. The mixture of both worlds had shaped James into the man he was today. For 8 years, he had stood guard at the palace, silently witnessing the passage of time. The rigid uniform, the iconic red tunic, and the towering black bearskin hat had become as much a part of him as his own identity. His every step, every motion, had been deliberate, as precise as the clockwork mechanisms that powered the palace itself. Nothing broke the ritual. Nothing could interrupt his focus. He was a royal guard, and for that he had sacrificed countless moments of his own life. But today, it was different. The thought of leaving the palace after all these years weighed heavily on his shoulders. Soon, he would be heading to Texas to reunite with his family, leaving behind the life he had known and the duty that had defined him. It was a bittersweet moment, the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. But for now, he had one final duty to fulfill: his last shift as a royal guard. As he stood in position, his back straight, his expression unreadable, the familiar hum of the crowd gathered outside the gates filled the air. Tourists from all over the world had come to witness the changing of the guard, an event that had become synonymous with British tradition. The crowd, buzzing with excitement, eagerly awaited the ceremony. Phones were raised, capturing every moment, every detail, as they tried to immortalize the magic of Buckingham Palace. And then, amid the sea of faces, a young girl caught James's eye. She was about 9 years old, dressed in a t-shirt bearing the American flag, and she held up a sign that read, "I'm from Texas. We know who you are." Her words pierced through the sea of noise, cutting straight to his heart. The simplicity of the message, combined with the sincerity behind it, made James pause for a brief moment. His eyes softened, but his posture remained unyielding. He couldn't let his emotions show. Not yet. He had spent 8 years mastering the art of composure, and he would not falter now. The girl stood with her parents. Her father, a U.S. military veteran who had served in Afghanistan and worked alongside British forces. As she held the sign high, her father leaned down and whispered in her ear. "He saved a U.S. sergeant in my unit," he said softly, a sense of pride in his voice. James didn't hear the words, but he could see the subtle shift in the girl's stance as she raised her hand in the military-style salute. It was a small gesture, one that spoke volumes. It was a salute not just to him, but to the bond between their 2 nations, a bond forged in the heat of battle and strengthened by years of camaraderie. As the ceremony continued, James couldn't help but feel a lump form in his throat. The rigid discipline he had maintained for so long now seemed fragile, like the edges of a story he had never allowed himself to fully write. His heart, which had been locked away for so many years, began to stir with emotions he hadn't anticipated. When his shift finally came to an end, he turned to leave his post, his military precision intact. But as he walked away, something unexpected happened. For the first time in 8 years, James broke protocol. He smiled, a small, almost imperceptible smile directed at the little girl who had saluted him. He nodded once, a silent acknowledgement that spoke volumes. The crowd watched in awe. James had given them a moment they would never forget, one that transcended the rigid rules of the guard and touch something deeper. It was a moment of connection, one that bridged the gap between nations, between past and present, between duty and humanity. As James disappeared into the shadows of Buckingham Palace, he felt the weight of his service lift from his shoulders. He had fulfilled his duty, and now he was ready for whatever came next. But he would always carry with him the memory of that little girl from Texas and the simple, powerful words that had changed everything. As the crowd buzzed with excitement, James Carter remained rooted to his spot, standing tall as the royal guard he had been trained to be. The bright sun glinted off the polished surface of his boots, casting fleeting shadows across the cobblestones beneath him. It was a beautiful day, one that seemed almost too perfect for a moment like this, the moment he would be leaving the only life he'd ever known. In just a few hours he would be on his way to Texas, and he couldn't shake the feeling that someone, was about to change the course of his last day in this prestigious role. The tourists around him cheered and whispered in anticipation, their eyes fixed on the synchronized movements of the guards, the march, the precision, and the discipline that had made the changing of the guard ceremony one of the most watched spectacles in the world. But none of them, not even the most enthusiastic observer, could see the subtle shift that had taken place. It wasn't in the uniform or the steps. It was in him, in that little girl's sign. "I'm from Texas. We know who you are." James felt the weight of those words settle into his chest like a stone. Her voice, clear and unflinching, had caught him off guard. It wasn't the sign. No, the message was so simple, so pure, that it shook him to his core. "We know who you are." It was as if she was telling him, with absolute certainty, that his service mattered. That after all these years of standing guard, with no one ever acknowledging his personal sacrifice, someone finally knew. He had been stationed at Buckingham Palace for 8 long years, yet no one had ever mentioned the United States. Sure, there had been pleasantries exchanged, brief smiles from tourists, but never a direct acknowledgement. The fact that a little girl from Texas, holding nothing more than a homemade sign, could make him feel seen was nothing short of surreal, and then the girl saluted him. The unmistakable military-style salute, the kind reserved for those who had walked the same hard path of duty, discipline, and honor. He didn't even know if she fully understood what it meant, but in that moment, she understood him. The man standing guard, the soldier who had given up so much for a country that wasn't his own, for a purpose that transcended borders. Her father, standing proudly beside her, caught James's eye. It was then that the words came, spoken softly, almost as an afterthought, but carrying the weight of history. "He saved a U.S. sergeant in my unit." James's mind raced. The words hung in the air, suspended between duty and the emotional truth that had been hidden for so long. He saved a sergeant. The revelation wasn't a reminder of some grand heroism. It was a quiet, personal truth. A moment in time, a split-second decision that had perhaps never been properly acknowledged. But now, here it was. A recognition, a truth that had been buried beneath years of military tradition, routine, and the walls he had built around himself to survive in a world of stoic silence. The girl's salute, combined with her father's words, unraveled something in him. James felt the walls he had so carefully constructed begin to crumble. It was as if the years of emotional restraint, the years of ignoring his own needs, his own identity, all came crashing down in that one beautiful, heartbreaking moment. As the ceremony proceeded, James held his position, but his eyes betrayed him. They welled with tears. He couldn't stop them. Not anymore. The realization hit him hard. He wasn't just a guard. He was a man with a story, with connections that spanned across oceans. A man who had spent years fighting his own silence. When the final moments of his shift arrived, James knew he couldn't leave without acknowledging the girl, without acknowledging the profound impact she had on him. Without a second thought, he broke protocol. He smiled. A small, fleeting gesture, but it was enough. Enough to acknowledge the little girl, the family, the connection that had just formed between him and 2 nations. As he turned to leave, he nodded in her direction. It wasn't just a nod of appreciation. It was a nod that said, "I see you." And I am seen. The crowd gasped. Some even applauded. They had witnessed something rare, something that transcended the ceremonial, the rigid, and the expected. In that moment, James Carter, the royal guard, had broken through the barriers of tradition to show his humanity, and for the first time, he felt truly alive, not as a guard, but as a man who had been seen, heard, and remembered. And as the crowd slowly began to disperse, James knew that his service at Buckingham Palace would remain forever etched in his heart. But this moment, this connection, would stay with him for the rest of his life. As James made his way off the guard post, the weight of his shift ending slowly sank in. He had been a royal guard for 8 years. The palace had been his life. Its walls, its rules, its silent routine had defined him for as long as he could remember. But today, none of it felt the same. The little girl's sign and her military salute had cracked open something deep inside him, something he had buried for so long. The stoic, unshakable guard he had always been was suddenly more human than he had ever allowed himself to be. As he walked past the rows of spectators, a knot formed in his chest. He could feel their eyes on him, but it wasn't the usual gaze of curious tourists or fleeting admiration. No, this was different. There was an undeniable shift in the air, a moment that had been captured, immortalized in the eyes of everyone who had witnessed it. A moment that would live on far longer than any ceremonial guard duty or military protocol ever could. The crowd's reaction was instant. Whispers rippled through the onlookers as James made his way to the gates. Some couldn't believe what they had just seen. A royal guard, of all people, breaking character. But others, especially those who had stood near the young girl with the sign, seemed to understand. They knew what had just transpired. Something profound had just unfolded in front of them. A tourist, eager to capture the moment, quickly pulled out their phone and recorded James's subtle yet impactful smile. It was a fleeting gesture, but it was enough to send ripples through the crowd. The camera clicked, the recording began, and the scene that had unfolded in those few seconds would soon spread far beyond the gates of Buckingham Palace. Later that day, as James finished changing out of his uniform and prepared to leave the palace grounds for the final time, his phone buzzed with notifications. At first, he ignored it. He had lived without the constant distractions of social media for years, choosing instead to focus on his service. But as the notifications continued to roll in, curiosity got the better of him. He opened his phone to find a viral video of that very moment, a video that was already sweeping across the internet. The video had been posted on TikTok, and within hours, it had gained millions of views. Comments flooded in from all corners of the globe, many from veterans and soldiers who recognized the significance of what had happened. Some spoke of the emotional weight of the moment, while others shared stories of their own experiences, connecting with James in ways he hadn't anticipated. One comment stood out above the rest. "A salute from a British Royal Guard feels like a thank you sent back home to all of us." It was a sentiment that hit James like a freight train. He hadn't thought of it like that before. He had always been the one serving, the one silently standing guard. But in that moment, through that small, simple act of recognition, he had somehow given back. He had acknowledged not only the girl's salute, but the bond between their two countries, the US and the UK, that had been forged in the fires of war and service. But it wasn't just veterans who reacted. Ordinary citizens from all walks of life shared their thoughts too. Many Americans praised the British soldier for his show of humanity, for breaking the rigid tradition that kept him emotionally distant from the world around him. And it wasn't just Americans. The video spread across Europe, Australia, and beyond, transcending borders and political lines. It was as if everyone who watched it saw not just a soldier standing at attention, but a man. Someone who understood the power of a simple gesture of kindness. James couldn't believe it. The world had watched and felt something real, something human. And it had all started with a little girl from Texas. She had sparked something deep inside him that he didn't even know was there. A longing for connection, for recognition, for being seen as more than just a uniform. The day he had thought would be one of quiet closure had turned into something much more profound. As James stood there in the quiet of his locker room, his phone lighting up with more comments, he finally understood the power of breaking from tradition, of showing that even the most disciplined, the most rigid, could still feel, could still be human. And that perhaps was the greatest lesson he would take with him as he walked away from Buckingham Palace and into the next chapter of his life. As the sun set on his final day, James felt a peace settle over him. The royal guard was not just about standing still, it was about standing for something greater. Today he had done just that, and in return, the world had noticed. James Carter had never imagined that his final day at Buckingham Palace would unfold like this. As he walked away from the gates, his mind was clouded, but not with the thoughts of duty he had expected. Instead, it was the image of the little girl, her hand raised in salute, that kept playing in his head. He had broken protocol for the first time in 8 years, and he felt a strange sense of freedom, but also a deep weight. The entire day had become a blur of emotions, from the crowd's stunned silence to the quiet understanding shared between him and the girl. It had felt like a momentary breach of tradition, but in that brief second, something more profound had occurred. James had allowed himself to connect with another person in a way he never had before, and it had left an indelible mark on him. As he drove back to his temporary residence near the palace, he couldn't shake the feeling that the moment had transcended everything he had experienced in his military career. All those years of rigid discipline, of standing in silence for hours, of pushing his emotions to the back of his mind, it all seemed so insignificant now. A few simple words, a salute from a young girl, had shattered the walls he'd built around his heart. The phone buzzed again in his pocket, but this time, James pulled over to answer. He had almost forgotten about the video that had gone viral, an innocent gesture that had somehow turned into something much bigger than himself. He opened the notifications and saw the flood of messages and comments pouring in. The first one he read nearly stopped his heart. A salute from a British Royal Guard. Feels like a thank you sent back home to all of us. It was like a gut punch. James had never considered himself a symbol of anything. But here, in the digital world that had no borders, his small act of humanity had reached people far beyond the gates of Buckingham Palace. Veterans, soldiers, civilians, they all seemed to resonate with what he had done. What had started as a personal moment of connection had now become a global exchange of emotion, a testament to the bond between the US and the UK that no one had thought to highlight before. The more James read, the more overwhelmed he became. His decision to smile, to nod, to break character for just a moment, had struck a chord. People had seen something in him that even he hadn't fully understood. They had seen the person beneath the uniform, the soldier who had lived with a quiet sense of isolation. And now, they were offering something in return. Recognition. The words from the girl's father. "He saved a US sergeant in my unit," rang in his ears. It was as if those words had unlocked a door he had long kept shut. He had been part of something much bigger than just his role as a guard. He had been part of a shared history, a story of sacrifice and bravery that spanned across continents. And for the first time, someone had acknowledged his role in that story. The video continued to spread, and by evening, it had become an unexpected viral sensation. As James scrolled through the comments, one message caught his attention. "Thank you, Guard, for showing that even in tradition there's room for compassion." It was the first time he realized that what had started as a small, almost accidental gesture had turned into a message. It wasn't just about duty anymore. It was about humanity. At that moment, James knew he couldn't leave this behind. The feelings he had experienced, the warmth of the girl's gesture, the sense of connection. It was something he had been searching for throughout his entire career, and now, it had found him when he least expected it. The world had seen his vulnerability, his humanity, and in doing so, had given him something he had never asked for, a sense of belonging. As the night deepened and he prepared for his departure, James realized that this farewell to the palace wasn't just the end of a chapter in his life. It was the beginning of a new understanding of who he was and what it meant to serve. He wasn't just a royal guard. He was someone who had, for one fleeting moment, bridged two worlds with a simple act of kindness. And in that act, he had found the recognition he never knew he needed. The next morning, as James woke up and glanced at his phone, he was met with a flood of notifications. The night before had been surreal, but now, the reality of what had happened hit him all at once. The video had exploded, reaching millions of people, spreading like wildfire across social media. His small act of humanity, breaking protocol to acknowledge the little girl from Texas, had turned into something far beyond anything he could have imagined. The comments were overwhelming. Some were simple words of thanks. Others were deeply personal messages from veterans, soldiers, and civilians who had all felt the impact of that moment. James scrolled through the messages, his fingers trembling slightly. One particular message stood out. "You reminded us all of what it means to serve, not just with discipline, but with heart." It hit him hard. He had spent his entire career in silence, buried in the rigid rules and traditions of the Royal Guard. And yet, in one small, almost subconscious moment, he had shared something that transcended all the formalities, something that connected him to people across the world. But there was one more notification he hadn't opened yet. It was from the little girl's father, the U.S. veteran who had whispered to her earlier, telling her about James saving a U.S. sergeant. He opened the message with a mixture of curiosity and anxiety. It read, "James, I don't know if you remember me, but I was with 2nd Battalion when you saved Sergeant Bailey in Afghanistan. I've followed your career with pride, knowing that you were out there representing more than just the UK. You represented all of us who serve. That moment yesterday, with my daughter. Thank you for letting her see what it means to serve with honor, humility, and heart. I'm not sure if you'll remember me, but I'll never forget what you did for my team." James paused. His heart skipped a beat as memories from his deployment in Afghanistan flooded his mind. The faces of soldiers, the chaos, the heat, the moments that had shaped him into the person he was today. He did remember Sergeant Bailey. He had pulled him from a firefight, saved his life, and kept him alive long enough for medics to get to him. It had been one of those moments in time, when you don't think, you just act. But to hear that the man had remembered him, had followed his career, was almost more than he could process. It was a wave of realization, a tidal wave of emotion that James had never allowed himself to feel before. His actions that day, the smile, the nod had been more than just a spontaneous break in protocol. They had bridged something deeper. He had not only shared a personal moment with a young girl, but also reconnected with a piece of his past. His identity as a soldier who had once fought alongside men who knew what it meant to make sacrifices for something bigger than themselves. James set the phone down and leaned back in his chair. The noise of the world outside felt muffled. It was as if the weight of all the years he had spent in silence had been lifted, one small gesture at a time. And now, people saw him, not just as a guard or a symbol, but as a person, as a human being who had done his job with pride, with discipline, and with heart. The video continued to trend online. It reached beyond veterans and soldiers, families, young people, and even casual viewers shared their thoughts, sending waves of gratitude and admiration in James's direction. But it wasn't the viral fame that mattered to him anymore. What mattered was that, for the first time, he had felt the weight of his service recognized. The girl's salute, the father's words, the connection across oceans, it all meant something far greater than the role he had played in the military. He thought about the next chapter, about life in Texas. But for the first time, he felt ready to move on, knowing that he wasn't just leaving behind a career as a Royal Guard. He was carrying with him something far more powerful, the understanding that every action, no matter how small, could make a difference. And in that simple, fleeting moment at Buckingham Palace, he had made a difference that would echo far beyond the gates of the palace. We'd love to hear from you in the comments below. James's story is more than just a tale of duty and tradition. It's about the moments that shape us, the small gestures that bridge gaps between nations, and the power of human connection. How did this story make you feel? Do you think breaking tradition can sometimes be the most meaningful way to serve? We're curious to know your thoughts on what it means to show compassion in the midst of discipline, and whether you've ever had a moment where a small act changed your perspective. Also, we want to hear from those of you who might have experienced similar feelings of recognition or connection, whether in your own personal journeys or through your service. Your stories matter, and sharing them can inspire others who may be going through something similar. If you're new here, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on our next story. We have plenty more to share, and we want you to be a part of the conversation. Join us as we continue to explore the profound moments that shape lives, one story at a time. Leave your comments below, and let's keep the discussion going.